Well, if you're hoping for just a little bit more Christmas, then I have some good news. There are actually 12 days of Christmas, just like the song says. This is the church season of Christmas that we're in right now. If you recall, the little wreaths that a lot of churches, including the group that we have that worships at the Hub, has been lighting is called an Advent wreath, and that actually means that season that we've been living in for the past several weeks is the season of Advent. We're actually in the season of Christmas now, which means that I think we're still entitled to learn a little bit from the story of Christmas. I mean, why not? One of the things that I've always found interesting about the story of Christmas is how many things occur kind of outside of, I guess, what you would consider Christian or Jewish in order to make the events of Christmas actually take place. I mean, after all, you have, the Magi. Well, the Magi were individuals who they believed in Judaism. Whether you would consider them, I guess, mainline Jews or not is kind of an interesting debate, but they were individuals who kind of lived out in Persia. Think of them as the remnants of when you have the Jews who are in captivity in Babylon. Well, these were the Jews who basically, or the legacy of the Jews who basically didn't come back to Jerusalem, and they just kind of stayed over there. And because of that, they understood what the prophecies were for a Messiah. They understood that this individual was going to be coming to earth, and they would look for signs in the stars of his coming, and that's where you actually get the wise men. So kind of an interesting little tidbit. Well, one of the other things I think is interesting are the events that actually led to Mary and Joseph being in the city of Bethlehem, or the little town of Bethlehem, in order to have the baby Jesus. It didn't have to be that way. See, in reality, they lived up in Nazareth, and Nazareth is up, more in the northern part of the country, at least as compared to Bethlehem. I think I looked at it on a map one time when I was doing youth, and it would be the equivalent of taking a 9-month pregnant woman on a walking trip from Washington, D.C. down to Richmond. That would be a hard sell. I mean, having just watched my wife go through that 2 times, I don't think that would be a very popular thing for me to bring up, especially if I was doing it because of a census. That's the whole reason why this was happening, right? It's because there was a government census that was taking place. Without going into all of the history and some of this stuff, I go into more detail in my book. You basically had this period of time taking place in the Roman Empire where there were a lot of debts that needed to be paid. There were a lot of wars that needed to be funded. So it was necessary to take a census of the people in Judea so that the Roman officials could understand how much tax they needed to take out of the area. And so if you think about what that means you have all these events that are taking place in the world, in Europe and out in Gaul, modern day France and Germany and all, within the politics of Rome that don't seem like they have anything to do with the Christmas story, but those are the things that caused the need for this census to take place. And it was because of this census that we end up seeing Mary and Joseph traveling down to Bethlehem so that they could have the Christ child in Bethlehem, the city of David, which was crucial to understanding who Christ was, because that was the prophecy, is that out of the root of David, in the house of David was going to come this Messiah that would reign for 1,000 years, that would issue in this period of peace and prosperity, and basically be the Messiah to save all people. It's just fascinating to me how God works through the secular world. So here in a second, what I want you to do is I want you to read the beginning of Luke 2. So it's something that I'm sure you guys have read many, many times over the last couple of weeks. Not just here at church, but all over the place. But read this and pay attention to exactly this aspect of the story that we're talking about. The fact that there was this census and that caused them to have to go from point A to point B. Well, then what we're going to do is I'm going to have you look at a couple different places in Acts. And when you look at those, what I want you to do is look in the life of Paul, who was himself not just a Jew, but he was also a Roman citizen. And because of this secular status he had of being a Roman, he was able to further his ministry far beyond what he possibly, what it possibly could have been if he didn't have that status. Look at how God works through not just his devout followers, but actually the secular and physical world around him in order to see his plan come to fruition. When you read all of that, the sections that are out of Luke, and when you read about Paul and Acts, there's one thing that I think really comes across, and it's that God is more than willing to use the secular world in order to see his plans come to fruition. Both through, the entire life of Christ, not just his birth, but the entire life of Christ. You see God working through individuals who were the, Jewish leaders at the time who had gone astray. You see God working through the Romans and and not just the Romans in terms of, the crucifixion, but also the fact that, you have this very powerful story of Christ and the centurion, which someone went over several weeks ago. And, in that circumstance, you can kind of see how the fact that this guy had this status, this secular status or political status, ended up actually amplifying what God was doing. In fact, throughout the entire Old Testament, we see time after time after time that God has used pagan nations and pagan rulers, people who actually seemed like they were actually mocking God from time to time, in order to see that his messages could clearly come across to his people and his plan could move on to the next step, ultimately leading to the person of Christ. And so I guess you step back and you look at that and you have to ask, what is it I'm supposed to learn from this? What am I supposed to glean? And what I end up gleaning from all of this is that God doesn't need us. And that may sound kind of counter to what, you would expect a pastor to say, but just think about it. God doesn't need you, but yet here he is. He doesn't need you in order to do anything, but yet he still sent his son to die on a cross from us. He doesn't need you, but yet he has given you so many blessings and so many opportunities to reach out in other people's lives. So it's like God doesn't need you, but he so desperately wants you. He wants you in terms of your soul, your compassion, your heart. He wants you in terms of your devotion, your activity, things that you can actually do for other people. So there really is this idea when you start looking at God that, what we do for him, the tasks, the missions, the callings that we have are really opportunities for us ourselves to be blessed, to have that opportunity to be a part of what God is calling us to do. So in your groups, what you're going to do, and this is going to be the last little break here, for this particular video, but in your groups, what you're going to do is you're going to read something else from Acts, and you're going to read about two individuals, Ananias and Sapphira. And these are two individuals who, as you'll read, will go through and, are a part of basically a commitment, something where they get together with their fellow church at the time, the early church, and they make a commitment that they are going to do a certain thing. But yet they don't. They put other things as a higher priority in their life. Their desire to be, financially secure, their wealth, their status. And as a result of that, God, in a very powerful and very, admittedly harsh way, demonstrates that I don't need you. I just want you to be a part of this because I want to show you my blessings. I want to show you the amazing things that I can do if you will just be devout and you'll come along and you'll be willing to place me as number one in your life. So take a moment in your small groups, read that story, and see what you don't take away from it. That story is admittedly a pretty harsh one, and it's one that, if you're not careful, can really go off in some really weird directions. But I think what we're able to take away from it, particularly given the theme of what we're talking about today, is the fact that, once again, God doesn't need us, but he desperately wants us. He wants us to have these opportunities to bless other people. This is where we go to a theme that pops up time and time again throughout the scriptures, which is that Christ isn't calling us to an easy life. He's not calling us to necessarily like a physically prosperous life or anything, but he is calling us to a more abundant life. He's calling us to a life that is full of peaks and valleys and highs and lows, and he wants us to have that because that is where we get the richness. That's where we get this feeling of purpose, things that carry us through whenever we're looking at our life and saying, what's the point? It's not really any secret that we're about to roll into January, and January is the period of time where we start seeing the peak of depression. Things like suicide start peaking at this point in time. Calls into therapists and people looking to try to find some kind of meaning in what's going on. Well, as Christians, we have meaning. And meaning doesn't come in the fact that we have value and the fact that we in and of ourselves are able to do something, but in the fact that God has given us value, that he has said, I don't need you, but I want you to come along with me. I want you to be able to do all of these things. And if you'll just come along and just, punch that ticket and come along for this ride, you will see how amazing of a thing that I can do through you and through this church. I think that's what God wants to do through each of us as individuals, and I think that's what God is already doing through this church, regardless of which family you end up worshiping with every single week. So I look forward to what God can do with us throughout the following year. I hope you're able to take something away from this, and until we meet again in the next year, God bless.